Venezuela often dominates the news agenda on account of its profound economic crisis and associated social ills, including the dubious distinction of boasting one of the highest crime rates in the world. Venezuela is often depicted as a revolutionary power owing to the so-called Bolivarian revolution started by the late Venezuelan leader Hugo Chavez. Ideologically, the Bolivarian revolution is a mix of Venezuelan nationalism, Pan-American regionalism and socialism. Whilst enormous academic and media attention has focused on how Bolivarianism has shaped Venezuela's economic policy since 1998, which was the year Hugo Chavez first came to power, comparatively small effort has been expanded on understanding how the Bolivarian revolution has influenced Venezuelan foreign policy in the past 2 decades. I'm your host Kasim, welcome to KJ Vids, and in this video we will examine the ideological, political and strategic considerations shaping Venezuela's foreign policy. Just before we begin, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can help to fund our videos and make KJ Vids self-sustainable. Sadly, due to the nature of our videos, YouTube consistently demonetizes them as they apparently fit in the politically sensitive category. You can also access our full reports and exclusive content by becoming our Patreon member from as little as $1 per month. Venezuela radically changed direction in the late 1990s with the advent of Hugo Chavez and his Bolivarian revolution. First elected to the presidency in December 1998, Chavez proved to be a remarkably resilient revolutionary leader in the face of massive internal and external opposition. During his 15 years at the helm of Venezuelan politics, Chavez faced determined opposition by US-backed political groups, widespread industrial unrest culminating in a general strike in 2002 and 2003, and an ill-fated coup attempt in April 2002. It is widely accepted in the expert community that much of the political, industrial and business opposition to Chavez was sponsored by the United States government. But the nature of Chavez's politics, and specifically his radical economic policies, intensified divisions in Venezuelan society, leading to a highly charged, polarized environment. Chavez's support base was mostly amongst the poor, especially Venezuela's indigenous, non-European community and the lower middle classes, whereas opposition to his rule was concentrated amongst the middle class, which is dominated by people of European origin. Whilst drawing attention to Chavez's shortcomings, in particular his demagoguery and single-minded pursuit of ideological-based economic policies, it is important to avoid the propaganda of his enemies who have tried to paint him as a dictator or, failing that, an authoritarian leader. Throughout his 15-year reign, Chavez operated within the confines of the Venezuelan constitution, and by and large he respected the checks and balances of Venezuela's democracy. By contrast, Chavez's opponents consistently displayed disdain for Venezuela's democratic institutions by continuously fomenting unrest and attempting to overthrow Chavez through extra illegal measures, notably an extended general strike and a failed military coup. Chavez's radical economic policies, and specifically his concentrated attempt at the redistribution of wealth and opportunity, was fueled by high oil prices in the first decade of the 21st century. The qualified success of some aspects of Chavez's economic policies led to high hopes amongst left-wing activists in Latin America, and more broadly on the global stage, that Venezuela was successfully implementing a socialist economy. But the reversal of these qualified successes, particularly after Chavez's death in March 2013, has called into question the sustainability of Chavismo, Chavez's quixotic take on the Bolivarian ideology. These shortcomings have come into sharp relief under the leadership of Chavez's successors, Nicolas Maduro. In the past couple of years, Venezuela has been gripped by a severe economic crisis, interspersed with riots and widespread civil disorder. On top of this, the country suffers from multiple systematic societal disorders, notably one of the highest crime rates in the world. The combination of these ills points to the failure of Chavismo, and specifically the socialist economic policies underpinning it. But before we rush to judgment on Venezuela, it is important to note that the final script has yet to be written. To that end, it is noteworthy that Maduro's government is proving to be resilient in the face of concerted and ferocious opposition. More importantly, the socio-economic base of Chavismo appears to be largely intact. in spite of Venezuela's profound economic crisis. This speaks to the intense polarization of Venezuelan society and raises the prospect of civil war further down the road, especially in the event of foreign intervention in Venezuela's domestic affairs. Named after the 19th century Venezuelan military leader Simon Bolivar, who liberated vast swaths of South America from the grip of the Spanish Empire, the Bolivarian ideology is essentially a form of Pan-American nationalism centered on national sovereignty as the building block of Hispanic solidarity. Bolivarianism has been utilized by a variety of political movements in the South and Central America, and it is elastic enough to serve a multitude of political goals and ends. But in its native Venezuela, Bolivarianism is associated with militarism and a tough and uncompromising approach toward notions of national sovereignty and independence. Hailing from a military background, Hugo Chavez fit the conventional Bolivarian mold perfectly, but he was also sufficiently innovative to marry up elements of the Bolivarian ideology with his own socialist ethos. The result was Chavismo, which has had a profound impact on Venezuela's foreign policy. Immediately after coming to power, Chavez pivoted towards socialist Cuba, a revolutionary state with a legendary anti-imperialist reputation. By extension, Venezuela distanced itself from the United States, which from the very outset has attempted to overthrow Chavez's Bolivarian revolution. Chavez's tough stance on American hegemony was entirely in keeping with his nationalist ethos, and more importantly, it resonated widely and deeply amongst nationalist communities across Latin America. In trying to understand Venezuela's post-1998 foreign policy, it is helpful to think of it as forming three concentric circles. The first circle is composed of the main political ideological pillar of the Bolivarian Revolution, which is centered on anti-imperialist sentiments and specifically opposition to the US role in Latin America. The second circle is centered on achieving Latin America unity and wider notions of Pan-Americanism. In practice, this involves greater engagement with Latin American states, in some cases to the point of interfering in the internal affairs of regional states with a view to strengthening nationalist and socialist movements. The third circle is concerned with developing global positions and specifically using Venezuela's oil wealth to develop influence and outreach beyond Latin America. To that end, Bolivarian Venezuela has sought to develop strong ties with major non-Western powers, notably Iran and China. During the early years of Chavismo, Chavez's huge reputation and his massive influence on public opinion across Latin America was interpreted as the locus of a continent-wide socialist pink tide. The pink tide was depicted as representing a decisive political and economic tilt towards the left, and by extension a decisive rejection of the dominant neoliberal economic model. Insofar as the United States is the chief proponent of the neoliberal economic model, Venezuela was necessarily in opposition to it. But contrary to conventional wisdom, Chavez's anti-Americanism was not primarily driven by socialist ideology. For a start, in the early years of his reign, Chavez proved to be a moderate socialist insofar as he refrained from the root and branch rejection of the capitalist model. Instead, Venezuelan foreign policy developed an anti-American trajectory for primarily two reasons. First, in keeping with the Bolivarian nationalist ethos and mindful of America's consistent intervention in Venezuelan domestic affairs throughout the 20th century, the Chavistas had to be by definition anti-American. There was also an immediate practical need for a tough attitude towards the United States, inasmuch as Venezuela had a pressing need to contain American influence both domestically and more broadly in its immediate environment. This need intensified when the US government openly reached out to the Venezuelan opposition and leading industrialists with a view to fomenting unrest in the country. Under Nicolas Maduro's leadership, attitudes towards the United States have hardened still further. This development is a direct reaction to hostile US policies which seek to isolate Venezuela in South America, in addition to weakening it from within by fomenting unrest and insurrection. The Chavistas never stop talking about South American unity. To be fair, their vision of unity is not entirely unrealistic insofar as they envisage a broad-based solidarity bound by minimalist principles, revolving around nationalism and a rejection of neoliberal economic models. These principles resonate widely across the continent, and they continue to energize a multitude of political parties and movements in every Latin American country. More specifically, despite its economic crisis, neo-Bolivarian Venezuela continues to be a source of ideological inspiration across the continent. Notwithstanding these positive features, it is fair to say that Venezuela's policy of promoting South American unity has failed. For a start, the continent is as divided as ever, and by extension, American influence, particularly in Colombia, Brazil and Chile, is arguably as strong as it has ever been. Secondly, Venezuela is politically isolated on the continent as demonstrated by its strained relationship with the continent's biggest power, Brazil. Furthermore, Venezuela faces hostility from neighbouring Colombia, as Caracas has supported left-wing political and guerrilla groups in Colombia for the past 20 years. This has largely been a reaction to Colombia's outreach to anti-Chavez groups in Venezuela. The Chavistas have always aspired to a global standing. Buoyed by high oil prices in the first decade of the 21st century, they set out to develop influence and sympathy across the world. This led to some strange policies, notably the decision in 2007 to supply cheap fuel to bus services in London, the capital of the United Kingdom. The deal was a flamboyant demonstration of gesture politics designed to strengthen the position of London's then left-wing mayor Ken Livingstone. Theatrics aside, Venezuela has undertaken serious moves on the international stage. The most important and far-reaching, both in terms of Venezuela's global outreach and the reaction it elicits from the US government, has been Caracas's alliance with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Originating in the close personal bond between former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and Hugo Chavez, the embryonic Iranian-Venezuelan alliance has persisted to this day, albeit at a less dramatic level, thus allowing Iran to establish a firm foothold in Venezuela. This is in keeping with the broader Iranian policy of penetrating Latin America with a view to achieving strategic parity with the United States. By developing strong ties to countries like Iran and China, Venezuela both improves its global standing and simultaneously acquires an insurance policy against American threats to overthrow the Bolivarian revolution. In conclusion, whilst Venezuela has failed to achieve its core foreign policy objective of creating a united Latin American front, nevertheless it has successfully raised its international profile by developing sustainable ties with major non-Western powers like China and Iran. That's all for today guys, thanks for watching another KJ vid. As mentioned at the beginning of this video, we encourage you to visit our Patreon page and consider becoming our member, which would significantly help our channel and allow us to remain independent in our political research. Please don't forget to hit that subscribe button and check out the important links in the description. Also be sure to leave your comments and questions and we'll try our best to answer them. Thanks for watching again and see you next time.